Good afternoon, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Sports Talk with Rags here in Season 3, Episode 17. And today, here we are joined by Tides broadcaster Pete Michaud. Pete, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Rex. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Glad to have you on. And let's start at the beginning. What got your interest here in broadcasting sports?
Oh, just like probably you and a lot of other people out there, a huge sports fan as a kid growing up and followed pretty much anything and everything. And when I got into high school in Chesapeake, Virginia,
Okay.
the public school system had a technical center
Yeah.
that offered a lot of vocational studies.
Right.
I had a friend of mine who was a year ahead of me who was talking to me one day, and he was taking a broadcasting course
Right.
that they offered there.
Right.
And he said, it's a lot of fun. You ought to, think about it if you'd be interested and give it a try. So the next year, I joined him there, and that kind of, got my foot in the door and got me a little bit of experience. From that point, got a part-time job working at a commercial station in the area while still in high school, and have been doing it ever since. Gravitated to sports, but did a lot of other things. I was really fortunate that the first real radio station I worked at was an all news station.
Yeah.
So it gave me an opportunity to do news, even did traffic on an occasion or two, in addition to sports and copywriting and production and everything else that goes into it, rather than just spinning records, which I would have done, at a more traditional station.
Right. Right. So, hey, with being right here locally, have you once you started getting paid to broadcast, I know that you've been with the Tides here since 2007 and you've done Admirals, but what was your first sports local? Was it with the Admirals the first time around?
Well, no, actually, the high school station that I mentioned,
Yeah.
even though it was through the public school system,
Yeah.
it was an actual on-the-air radio station
Right.
in Chesapeake, and they did high school football.
Right.
So I actually started with them. That was my first introduction to sports,
Okay.
doing high school football in Chesapeake, Virginia.
Yeah.
And then from that point, I eventually moved over to WTAR radio
Okay.
in Norfolk, which was the big AM station for many, many years. Did some high school football with them, a little college football show on Saturday afternoons that they had. I got involved in that, and then got involved with Old Dominion because they, for many, many years were the flagship station for Old Dominion. I did all the women's games for them for 5 years, did a lot of the men's games along with Bob Rathbun
Oh
for
yeah.
about 5 years. So, that got me into college basketball. And then in 1989, when the Admirals hockey team was founded in Norfolk, they just happened to sign on with WTAR, which was lucky for me because although I was a hockey fan as a kid, I had
Right.
no experience in broadcasting it, but they happened to sign on with the station, and they sort of needed an additional person to do some games. So that got my foot in the door doing some hockey, kind of learning on the fly. And that turned out to be a nearly 25-year experience with the hockey team. So, a little bit of luck along the way. And, at times I, tried to go in a certain direction. At times a direction was presented to me, and that got me doing a lot of different things.
Right. And so for the fans out there, 1989, hockey comes to scope. John Brophy, Rod Taylor, Dennis McEwen, Pat Kavanaugh, Chad Ackerman. Very successful. Blake Cullen, very successful organization there with the ECHL there in the late 80s going into the 90s.
Yeah, it really was just the perfect storm at the perfect time. The area had not had hockey, since the 1970s. John Brophy brought a product that, was very exciting, to the fans, and that included fighting to a degree. Certainly, John was not hesitant at all to send guys out there to throw a couple of punches. It certainly helped that they had great teams over the years. Won 3 ECHL championships over a dozen seasons. Always had winning records. Always had winning teams. Always had great players. You mentioned many of them a moment ago, and many others would eventually go on to play in the National Hockey League and have great careers there, as well as in the minors. So it really was just the perfect thing at the perfect time, and it was so affordable.
Right.
You look back to those early years, you could get a ticket for $7-8.
Yeah.
And not to sit up top, but to sit down low. You had a great seat. It was just a wonderful environment. They sell out almost every Friday night game. People would show up on a Friday night, couldn't get into the arena, and they'd go ahead and get in line and buy a ticket for the next Friday night game just to make sure they had one. That's how big it was. People now can't even understand what it was like back then, but it was just a magical time for the hockey club.
Yes, and you bring up Bob Rathbun. I mean, an earlier episode he came on. I mean, and there at the field house, definitely some exciting college basketball games. Men playing at the Scope, and some games at the field house, and then the Lady Monarchs playing at the field house.
Oh yeah, I love, and as I said a few minutes ago, I was the primary voice for the women's team for 5 years. I guess it would have been about 88 to 93, right in that range. Had some really good teams. We made the NCAA tournament, pretty much every year. They weren't quite the teams that had won national championships back in the 70s and early 80s, but they were still awfully good. Wendy O'Leary was the head coach, and played in that environment. And obviously the building they have now is fabulous. No disrespect whatsoever to Chartway Arena, but the field house was just that old school environment with the wooden bleachers and a small crowd, and you're right on top of the court. And it was so much fun to be there. And on the men's side, as you mentioned, playing over at Scope, which wasn't a great venue, but still, you get 7,000-8,000 people in there. And, there were some memorable games. I remember the night when I got to call the game when North Carolina, which was, I believe, ranked first or second in the nation at the time, came in and got to do that game. J.R. Reed was making a homecoming, back here in the Hampton Roads. And, a few games like that were fabulous. I remember going on the road. The last game, in fact, that I ever did for Old Dominion on the men's side was an NCAA tournament game, played Kentucky, of all teams, one of the great, traditional powerhouses of college basketball up at the Centrum in Worcester, Massachusetts. So, it's a great basketball tradition, which, of course, continues even to this day. Right. For a mid-major program, they've had, so much success and so many great players. And, I look back in the old days with, Kenny Gaddison and Chris Gatling, who was real big when I was doing the games. He was probably the marquee player, back in those years. And, a lot of fun, a lot of energy, a lot of excitement.
Right. And then to piggyback on that, tomorrow afternoon's guest, I have Dave Twardzik coming on, so looking forward to share his career. And then has he come back, and he's been the radio voice here with Ted Alexander.
Right.
Yeah,
of course. I remember Dave when I was a kid, right, watching and listening to the games. And I think younger fans today won't understand or appreciate what it was like probably for me and you and anybody that might be 50 or older.
Right.
I mean, I can remember laying in bed at night. I vividly remember this when Old Dominion upset then number 1 DePaul.
Yes.
And that was at DePaul. Right. And having one of those little transistor radios with the white wire and the single earpiece. No fancy Bluetooth headphones or anything like that, and no chance to watch it on, ESPN Plus or any other network. The only way to follow what was happening was just on a live radio broadcast, and just to listen to that game. and to hear them, beat the number one team in the nation. Bob Rathbun called that game.
Right.
And to this day, I still, just vividly remember, just hanging on every word, listening to that.
Yes, and I think one of the alums that's still involved, with maybe the radio pregame, but I think Billy Mann, got the winning shot here of
Yep.
that game. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Never had a chance to work with Billy. I know, in fact, after I left, he ended up, becoming a member of the broadcast team. But unfortunately, I never got a chance to work with Billy. But, while I don't know him personally, certainly, know the foothold that he has in Old Dominion history.
Well, Pete, here with you being a local guy and you being with the Tides here, ever since they've become an Orioles affiliate there in 2007. So, of course, you remember with being a local guy, remember Met Park, but, being having your job of play-by-play there, Harbor Park, and the Tides being affiliated with the Orioles. Just talk about that assignment here that you've had since 2007.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, that was the very first year that we became an Oriole affiliate after, what was it, 38 years with the New York Mets. And there were a lot of people, and there are still some even today, that rue the change in affiliations and wish we had stayed with the Mets. But, it was not to be. There was, a lot going on behind the scenes between, the Tides ownership and the Mets ownership that, just was not working out. We had a wonderful working relationship with the Orioles. Unfortunately, the teams have not been very good. We've only had one playoff team, since 2007. That was back in 2015 when they won the division title. But certainly the Orioles, major league organization has not been very good, over the last 10 or 20 years, aside from a rare season here or there. But you certainly see the changes taking place now, really, going back over the last 2, 3, 4 years with Mike Elias, the general manager, and, the draft picks that they have been able to accumulate and the young talent that they have been able to bring in. And now, in fact, the Orioles are ranked for the first time, in fact, ever, as the number one farm system in all of baseball. They've been up near the top now for the last several years, but they're number one overall right now. And, it's always tough to predict, how good a team is going to be, especially at the minor league level. But, this was a club last year that finished 2 games under 500, and that was with Grayson Rodriguez, only pitching half the season, and with a lot of other guys having gone up. Adley Rutschman was with us only briefly, but we've got some guys coming in. I know that many of those guys are going to be in the big leagues this year, but I have a sneaking feeling that the Orioles are not going to want many of their top prospects sitting on the bench in Baltimore. They would rather have them playing every day in Norfolk if they're not going to be starting with the big league club. Now, Rutschman, obviously, we're not going to see him again unless he gets hurt.
Right.
Grayson Rodriguez, I doubt it from what he's done in spring training. I think he's going to make the big league club. But a few others like a Colton Cowser, a Joey Ortiz, players of that nature, if they're not penciled in as starters at the big league level on opening day, I think we're going to see them in Norfolk. And I think that, is going to make this a very good Norfolk team this year.
Yes, and I mean, now do you get the opportunity to go to Sarasota for a little bit during spring training before the Tide season starts, or to get to know some of the minor leaguers, some of the young Oriole talent?
No, I wish I did, but that's just a financial decision. As nice as it would be to go down there, it doesn't economically, benefit the Tides. The Orioles aren't going to pay to have me go down there, and it doesn't benefit the Tides
Right.
to send me down there. So, basically, I just follow along online, read about the team, maybe try to catch some innings in spring training. And then, really it's learning a lot on the fly because most of these guys won't come in, especially with the minor league season starting earlier this year, starting on March the 30th, the same day that the major league season gets underway.
Right.
So most of these guys are going to be coming in, just a day or two before
Mm,
the season begins. So we
right.
open up on the road this year. In fact, in Durham, we'll probably have a workout, I would imagine, the day before. And probably for guys that aren't returners, that'll probably be the first time I meet many members of the club. Will be on that Thursday, the 29th. And then 24 hours later on Friday night, the 30th, we'll be playing for real in Durham.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, Norfolk here ever since Durham and Charlotte have been a AAA team. I mean, those aren't too far, but now with the International League that used to be, mainly East Coast and maybe a couple of not really Midwest, but a little bit far out, but like Nashville, that used to be the Pacific Coast League, in another league. That's now in the International League. I mean, now AAA here with the Pacific Coast League and the International League. I mean, the International League has definitely expanded here with the amount of teams.
Yeah, it's really different now. They've taken several clubs, and you alluded to one in Nashville that used to be part of the old PCL.
Right.
Nashville came over, Memphis came over. Those are teams, in fact, that are actually in the Tides division now. Jacksonville, which had been a AA club for 50 years, uh, just within the last two seasons, has moved up to the AAA ranks. So it really is different. Of course, you probably remember, you go back even back to the 1980s, I guess, when you used to have three AAA leagues. You
Right.
used to have the old American Alliance.
Yeah.
And that was, to me, it still makes sense economically in terms
Right.
of travel. Instead of having teams from the East Coast going, all the way out to Memphis and Nashville and Minneapolis, or St. Paul to be more
Right.
exact, where you have the Twins AAA team and you've got a team in Iowa. You used to have the Old American Association, which kind of encompassed all those teams in the middle of the country, the central part of the country, but now they're pretty much all now in the International League. So it does make some for some much more difficult travel than we used to have in years gone by.
Yes, and it seems like ever since coming out of the pandemic that now just about every Monday is an off day, and whether it's home or road, home or away, you're playing Tuesday through Sunday, series.
And that's against the same opponent. That was one of the changes they brought in a couple of years ago, that we would play 6-game series, and that does save a lot of wear and tear on terms of travel.
Right.
That you're not, playing 2-game and 3-game series. You always play somebody, as you said, barring a few exceptions, Tuesday through Sunday, always a 6-game series. Now, the Monday day off thing is a little bit tricky. Everyone looks at it and says it must be great now, because in the old days, we would play quite often 20, 22, 24, 26 days in a row without a day off. People look at the schedule now and say, hey, it must be easy. You've got a day off every week. Well, not really, because as you mentioned a moment ago, with teams like Memphis and Nashville and Jacksonville coming in, the Tides have many more opponents now that they have to fly to. They
Right.
can't bus. I mean, really, the only opponents that they go to that they can bus to are Durham and Charlotte, and maybe a team like Scranton or Lehigh Valley, if we even go there. And you don't play them all every year.
Right.
So the Tides are traveling now almost every Monday. You can't, even if you're busing, you can't bus 5.5 hours to Charlotte on a game day and then get off the bus and play. So really, Durham is the only opponent where they can travel on the day that they begin a series. That would be on a Tuesday.
Right.
Every other road series they play, they have to travel on Monday. And that usually means, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, be at the ballpark at 4, get on a bus, go to the airport at 4:30, and be on a flight at 6:30 or 7. So technically an off day, yes, but it certainly doesn't feel like an off day.
Right. And also, preparing for this episode, I saw that back in 2017 you got the opportunity to call some Oriole games there on the radio.
Yeah, they had a need for somebody to fill in, so they gave me a call and went up and did a 3-game series against the Astros, who were one of the best teams in baseball. They won 2 out of 3, but I guess the highlight of that would have been I got the call the final game of that series when Zach Britton, a former Tide,
Right.
set the new major league record for consecutive save opportunities converted. I think it was, I'm trying to remember the exact number, 50 some odd, 53, 55 in a row, something of that nature.
Right.
So that was the highlight there. And, it was a wonderful opportunity to go up and get a chance to, call some major league games, although it didn't feel all that different since there were so many guys on the field that had played in Norfolk in years gone by. But, wonderful memory, and, wish I'd had a chance to do more, but it, hasn't worked out that way. But, still great to look back on those 3 games.
Yes, and I know that with the Tides being the AAA affiliate, and sometimes prospects go to Double A. There with the Orioles, it's Bowie. But last year, my wife and I, we had an opportunity to take our 9-year-old nephew Ryan, who's a diehard Orioles fan, and the night that we took him to Harbor Park, it was the last game that Gunnar Henderson played for the Tide. So, just here, like we've said before, and, just as of last year, definitely see guys one night, they're playing in downtown Norfolk at Harbor Park. The next day, they're getting the call up to either play Camden Yards, being in an Orioles uniform.
Yeah, that really is the great thing about AAA baseball. And it was the same thing with the Admirals when they were in the American Hockey League, which is, of course, the highest level of the minors in professional hockey, that you could see a guy, playing at Scope or playing at Harbor Park one night, and literally, without exaggeration, like you said, 24 hours later, sometimes less than that,
right?
You could see them. They could play a Friday night game at Harbor Park, and 1 o'clock Saturday afternoon, you could see them, on television playing, with an Oriole jersey on. And, a lot of guys have made that trek, in the last couple of years. You look at a Cedric Mullins, you look at a Kyle Stowers, DL Hall, of course, we already mentioned Adley Rutschman. You mentioned Gunnar Henderson. Those 2 guys, I think, are going to be not only, good big league players, but I think all-stars in the very near future, if not this year, especially in the case of Rutschman, who a lot of people think is already maybe the 2nd or 3rd best catcher of baseball, at this moment. So, it does, make it amazing. And not only from the Tide side, but from the flip side, from the opponents.
Right.
When people come out to Harbor Park, someone might say, I'm not an Oriole fan. And that's great. But if you're a Yankee fan or a Red Sox fan or a Braves fan, come out and watch their prospects, because it wasn't but a couple of years ago that, Aaron Judge was, wearing a Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Rider uniform and playing against the Tides. Right. And, just a short time later was in the big leagues. And of course, we all know, what's become of him, and, Ozzie Albies and some of the guys down with Gwinnett that have gone on to play so well with the Braves. And, we saw guys with last year in the Cardinals organization in Memphis, and next thing you know, they're in St. Louis. And we can say that for every team in the International League. And it really is what makes, AAA baseball, especially, that much more exciting to watch.
Right. And I think 2 years ago, I mean, with the Tides being affiliated with the Orioles, Larry Sheets' son, Gavin Sheets, that was a member of Charlotte, he was playing against the Tides, but then got the call up there after the game, and made his White Sox debut.
Yeah. Just, you can go down pretty much every team in the International League that the Tides play against and come up with, guys like that. I remember when Aroldis Chapman was playing with Louisville, and, he came into Harbor Park one night. I remember watching him throw 100 miles an hour and thinking, number one, nobody's going to ever hit this guy. Number two, I hope he doesn't kill somebody as hard as he throws. And, it was like a day or two later, he's in the big league. So, it's just a never ending list of guys that make that jump and not only make the jump, but do it very successfully.
Yes. Well, hey, Pete, I appreciate your time, and if you can stay on just for a couple minutes here after we're done taping, but my wife and I were definitely looking forward to 2023 there at Harbor Park here for the Tide season this coming year.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Rags. Any other time you'd like to have me on, enjoy talking about the Atvilles and the Tides and sports in general. My pleasure.
All right. So, all right, fans. Well, hey, that's it's a wrap here for today's episode. And thanks again, Pete, for coming on.
My pleasure.